On the local news roundup, tragedy at UNC Charlotte as America's active shooter nightmare comes to campus. 2 students lose their lives, 4 are injured. We have the latest on the investigation into the shooter. Those deaths become part of Charlotte's homicide count, which is rising at an alarming rate. Teachers from CMS and around the state march on Raleigh for the second year in a row. Among their demands, more support for public education and raises for non-teaching staff. And it's budget time in Mecklenburg. We get a peek. Particularly exciting news for pet owners. And South Carolina is on the verge of welcoming the Panthers. Our roundtable of reporters is ready to detail those stories and others, and they include Alex Olgan from WFAE News. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Jonathan Lowe is back. He's a reporter anchor for Spectrum News. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Joe Bruno is here from WSOC TV Channel 9 Eyewitness News. Did I get it all in there? The whole
You got it all. Hey, Mike.
It's a long thing for the Chiron. And Eric Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mike.
Well, at approximately 5:40 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, on the last day of classes for the spring semester, a lone gunman walked into a classroom in the Kennedy Building at UNC Charlotte and started shooting.
All of a sudden, without warning, no one yelled, no one nothing, just guns started ringing out.
I just see like 30 to 50 kids just like running like a stampede towards me, screaming like, there's a shooter, there's a shooter.
And I call my parents to, let them know I love them. And then I hear everyone get on the floor.
2 students died, 4 were wounded, but the alleged gunman was quickly apprehended by campus police and taken into custody by CMPD. UNC Charlotte Chancellor Philip Dubois called the violence unimaginable.
This is the worst day in the history of UNC Charlotte. We are a very tight-knit community. Universities are that way. And this really just shakes us to our very core.
The alleged shooter was a former student, and early in the investigation, CMPD Chief Kerr Putney said the Kennedy Building seemed to have been picked by design, though there were still lots of unanswered questions.
Unfortunately, this is an incident that really strikes a chord with us all because we can't really discern the why just yet. It really appears that there was no specific person, but and the randomness is what's most concerning.
Well, that was earlier this week. What do we know today? Do we know yet why he did what he did, why he selected that room, that building, those students?
No.
We do not. The only connection to that class that has come out is the professor of that class wrote a blog post saying that the shooter originally registered for his course, but he withdrew in January.
And there's an article in the paper where I think they interviewed that professor who wrote that blog, and the professor evidently ran into this former student on the campus and either told him or thought to himself, I've forgotten the details here, that it was the wrong decision to make to withdraw from the class. I'm not sure what the role that played, but are we to take from that he chose that class because he was disgruntled?
I don't think so. I think that was more of a comment that the professor just ran into him and said, hey, it's a shame that you dropped it, but I understand why you did. From what I take from that is that the professor was just saying that to mention, hey, this is the last time that I communicated with
So we know that. The professor has said that he was a member of the class at some point. I think he dropped the class in January. But the police have said nothing about anything they've gotten out of questioning the shooter?
No,
Not yet.
No.
Okay. There is some conversation, and this has been going on, I think mostly as a result of what happened in New Zealand, and when the New Zealand Prime Minister refused to say the name of the assailant was it a mosque in New Zealand, where a mass shooting took place. There seems to be some question about whether or not we should say the name of the shooter, because in some cases that's what they want. They want their name out there. It's all about them. And this is not about them at all. It's about the 2 people who lost their lives. What are your thoughts about, before I say his name, what are your thoughts about that?
So if I could just say, I think that the reason people, or at least what I take from it, the reason people are having trouble saying his name is because of what he said and did as they were walking him into CMPD, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department. He not only smirked back at, as you have all the media out there trying to ask him questions, of course, trying to do our job, he looks back, smirks, and says something to the effect of, "I just shot a bunch of people." So,
He said, I walked into the room and I shot the guy.
right,
I think that's close to what he said.
something to that effect. And so, this is already a sickening thing to deal with. And then when you see that from the alleged shooter, it does bring up the question of, should we even give him that attention? Should we more so be focusing on the victims who we've lost in this situation and those that are still injured? Also, I think it was interesting that he did not show up for the appearance yesterday on the murder charges. He waived his right to appear. So, it also begs the question, does he want the attention? Is that what his motive is? As the chief said, we don't know.
I think news media outlets have the responsibility to use his name as sparingly as possible. I think
agree.
it's important to mention maybe once who he is, one picture, so people know who he is, whether they ever encountered him, whether they could possibly add anything to the criminal investigation. But I know at this point, I personally will not be using his name anymore, other than what I already have for those reasons.
Yeah, there's the public's right to know. Obviously, the news is the first draft of history, is often said. So you, in some, like Joe said, you at least want to explain who was charged. But what I've covered other mass shootings, and what I've heard from family members of victims is that they really don't want to use the name, and they're the ones that are suffering in all of this. And if there's any way we can
take their lead.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing is, as we've known from what mass shooters have written, they've studied previous mass shootings and in some cases idolized the previous shooters. And I think there is just a general concern about copycats. And I don't know if that happens in every case, but even if it is possible,
Well,
why?
if that happens in one case, it's one too many.
Exactly.
Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with, I think, the general sentiment. You have to be careful not to entirely subjugate the information about the horrible people that perpetrate these acts, because it is news, but you don't want to glorify it. And I think that's the line that people are trying to walk here.
So this kid is 22 years old. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, 4 counts of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill, and possession of and discharge of a firearm on educational property. Police say the gun was legally purchased and that the shooter had multiple magazines of bullets on his person. What else do we know about him?
I don't think much.
He had gone right to CPCC for a while, right? And then went to UNCC.
Moved here 2 years ago from Texas.
Apparently was living with his father in Noda, I believe is what I read.
Yes, his Noda apartment was searched.
Yeah, but we really don't know much beyond that. I mean, it's pretty spare, the information
I think that goes
we have.
back to your question of, saying his name and giving him attention and figuring out who he is and all of that.
Well, as is so often the case with these killers, people will say, well, he was so quiet. He never this. In one case, one of the students in that class or another class with him said he never said a word in the classroom. His grandfather in Texas, when contacted by a reporter after the incident, it was the reporter informing the grandfather that this guy had allegedly committed this crime. He said, "You're describing someone foreign to me. This is not in his DNA." He was certainly not on CMPD radar because he has no police record whatsoever. How do you can't protect against that if you have no record, can you?
No, and I think that among the endless list of horrible things with this is, of course, the why, and in this case, it seems, I guess, even more bewildering because so far we really have no answers.
And I would just say that we don't know, I'm not referencing this shooter in this incident, but the Department of Homeland Security did a study of all the shootings in 2017. And what they found was over 3/4 of the shooters had made some sort of concerning communication prior to the event, whether on social media or to a friend. And a lot of times those don't get reported.
Yeah.
And so, I know we can't predict it, but in many cases, these people are making some sort of communication.
Do we know if this guy has a social media presence? Because no one's talked about anything that he may or may not have posted, or even the lack of any posting on social media.
Sources have told us that he does not have any social media accounts.
Is that a red flag?
Well,
I guess maybe it could be in this day and age.
Yeah.
But usually, I mean, all of us around this table know this. Usually you go straight to the social media and you turn up at least some kind of evidence. So I don't know that there's much you can conclude from whether he's on social media or not.
I don't think so. And the FBI also did a study, and what they found was that when these concerning behaviors were exhibited, most people that, like, let's say this shooter talked about their plans with, either tried to talk directly to the shooter or almost half did nothing.
And I'm sure Mike, you've obviously been talking about this all week on the show, and everybody's been reporting on it. But again, we're going to get to, at some point, already have the issue of the weapon. It was purchased legally.
Right.
That's going to be part of the conversation, part of the debate very soon.
I just wanted to...
a debate that will go nowhere, and there will be no resolution to. I just want to point that out right now.
Yeah.
We will have this conversation 1,000 more times, and nothing will ever happen.
Yes.
Which, I know we're talking, the conversation right now is on the shooter. My next door neighbor is actually a UNC Charlotte employee who, by the way, works in the library, which is next door to Kennedy Hall building. He told me those people, the students and staff who were, whether you were in the building in the classroom or you were next door, are traumatized. And the story he tells me of, when before they got the 9R alerts on their phone, they came across the loudspeakers twice. And it was the second time that he's like, well, wait a minute, we just had a drill. This is a little bit different. And then people started panicking and running. But what struck me was how many doors they had to, as they were clearing. He didn't know that there had actually been a shooting until the police came in and started busting down the doors in the library. He was describing the damage and how, that's literally what they had to do. And then they get to his office where he had been hunkered down with his coworker, and the guns are drawn. And I just was thinking to myself, gosh, you didn't even know there was a shooting. And then you see the aftermath of it, and that's traumatizing. And I just really feel for, the students and staff over there that are going to have to continue on, knowing that their school now has been the site of a shooting.
By the way, I'm sure this has been said this week, but it just strikes me again. First of all, even in this room, usually when we come in here on a Friday, people are kind of joking around, happy that the weekend's here. This is the glummest this room has been since I've been coming on this program. And these are just people covering, not just, but people covering it, not people who were directly involved in it. And as visceral as this is hitting everyone, whether you are connected to UNCC or not, or you witnessed this, what is so striking to me is that from a national perspective, this didn't even make a blip.
Right. There was a network who did not have this on Tuesday.
Right. I mean, it just wasn't
even
even
a national cable network that did not air this.
Because this country is so numb to what's going on. It's just horrible.
It was on that entire day. It was the Bill Barr
Yeah.
testimony, and it was just so shocking that, okay, now we've gotten to the point where it's not even breaking news anymore.
So this kid had no police record. He has no social media presence. His grandfather said he had no interest in guns. WBTV uncovered that he had researched the Sandy Hook and other shootings like Sandy Hook, and I only have 10 seconds here, but the FBI is assisting the CMPD in investigating this. Is that normal procedure for the FBI to get involved at this point? Okay, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this and move on to other things as well, because there has been other news, although this is the most important story probably in a very long time. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to bridging the gap between adventure and adventurer by helping people select vehicles that fit one's lifestyle. More at MazdaofSouthCharlotte.com. And Southeast Radiation Oncology Group, offering non-surgical treatments for basal and squamous cell skin cancers with radiation therapy. Details at treatcancer.com/skin. Well, the latest version of the Charlotte Transit Plan has been given the green light. That was the easy part, now the hard part. Where's the money coming from? The new plan envisions light rail stretching across the county from Matthews west into Gaston County. The tunnel idea has been scrapped, but so has the train to the Lake Norman area. So CAT CEO John Lewis will update us on the plan and shares his thoughts on how to get that needed $5 billion Monday on this program at 9.
Washington finally gets around to talking about infrastructure. The president gets into a firefight over firefighters. And post-Mueller, has the White House asked the Attorney General to start asking some questions of his own?
I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. I mean, they have not asked me to open an investigation.
It's the Friday News Roundup. That's next time on 1A.
The Roundup of the Week's news continues on 1A, coming up from 10 to noon on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup. Alex Olgan is here from WFAE News, Jonathan Lowe from Spectrum, Joe Bruno from WSOC-TV, and Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal. You were just telling us off the air, Joe, that in covering this shooting at UNC Charlotte, you were in the Channel 9 helicopter because you were covering a water main break and got called to the scene of this. So you were flying over the campus at about the time this was happening, at 5:50 p.m., and you got to see from a bird's eye view what that looks like. What does it look like?
It doesn't look good. I mean, the images of police officers running with their guns drawn and students coming out of the building with their hands up, those are images that are going to stay with me. Having to read on air the 9er alert that said run, hide, fight. Just hollow words. Like, it's just, I mean, I'm pretty sure I was shaking when I was reading that 9er alert out there. Just being in a helicopter and having that vantage point, it's a different view than when you're on the ground because you have a limited point of view. You're with the police, you're controlled. When you're in the helicopter, you can see everything. And then we're just flying over campus, not a soul in sight. There was supposed to be a big concert. Popular rapper Waka Flocka Flame was supposed to perform. We could see like nobody was at the football stadium. No one was on the baseball field where a baseball game was supposed to be played. The baseball team was telling people to stay in their cars. From what I understand, they were hiding in the dugout. Just to see that from a bird's eye view is just horrifying.
To piggyback off of what Joe, so I was watching his coverage, and you know, you say you sounded nervous. No, you didn't. Very composed, but on the ground. So I lived not far from UNC Charlotte. It was interesting to hear what Joe was saying, and then hearing cops for a straight 10 minutes. I timed it, and it was just headed towards the university for. I've never heard sirens for a straight 10 minutes. And my neighbor told me that at the moment that everybody was running out, it seemed odd that this guy, the shooter, seemed to pick. This happened at some sort of shift change, and have not been able to confirm, but it happened at some sort of shift change with law enforcement. So there was a increased amount. And if you remember, he sat there and waited for police to come in. It's almost like he expected that they would be there quickly because there was an increased amount. It happened at shift change. So, again, we haven't been able to confirm that, but that came from my neighbor who, again, works at UNC Charlotte.
Alex.
And one thing to mention, I'm 27. In some cases, I'm less than 10 years older than these people. The students, I grew up doing lockdowns all the time in school. So, yes, it's unimaginable in some sense, but also I'm really prepared, and I knew exactly what to do if I was in that situation. We've had active shooter training in school. I've grown up with it. These kids have too. Sometimes we're called Generation Lockdown, which is really sad, but they knew to barricade the doors. They knew exactly what to do, even though it was shocking. I mean, I interviewed a guy who teaches this active shooter training, and he said he got emails from professors who he had previously trained saying, the training kicked into gear. We knew to barricade the doors. I told the students to be quiet. It was just sort of, I hate to say it, but training.
And it sounds like UNC Charlotte, hats off to them, unfortunately, is very prepared for this because, again, like I said, my neighbor told me that, they came over the loudspeakers before that twice before the 9er alerts went out. So technologically, it sounds like UNC Charlotte, unfortunately, is
the fact
prepared.
that they can lock every door on the campus with a push of a single button.
Right.
And that's a relatively popular system. I spoke to the manufacturer of one, not the one at UNCC, but he said that within 3 to 5 seconds, a push of a button, either from a wall button on your phone, on a computer, can lock down almost all the doors.
So at the center of all this, of course, are the victims. The wounded are 19-year-old, and I hope I say their names correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, 19-year-old Drew Piscaro of Apex, 20-year-old Sean DeHart of Apex, 20-year-old Rami Al-Ramadan from Saudi Arabia, and 23-year-old Emily Haupt
Yep.
from Charlotte. Do we know yet the extent of their injuries or how they are doing? Because I know there are HIPAA rules, and we can't necessarily know everything about them.
I believe Sean was able to leave the hospital the night of the shooting. I talked to Drew's cousin. The night of the shooting, Drew's cousin told me that Drew had surgery and has a long road ahead, but is expected to be okay. We also did learn that Emily is expected to walk for graduation as well. I do believe we contacted Rami's father as well, and Rami's father told us that he is doing well as well.
Okay.
And graduation will go on as scheduled.
Two students were killed. They were 19-year-old Ellis Parlier of Midland and 21-year-old Riley Howell of Waynesville. Riley has been called a hero in all of this because he went after the shooter and he knocked him to the floor, but obviously at a tragic price. CMPD Chief Kirk Putney put it this way.
You're either going to run, you're going to hide and shield, or you're going to take the fight to the assailant. Having no place to run and hide, he did the last. But for his work, the assailant may not have been disarmed. Unfortunately, he gave his life in the process. But his sacrifice saved lives.
What do we know about Riley Howell?
His family released a lengthy statement saying that he was truly a one-of-a-kind guy, loved outdoors, loved adventures, he loved Star Wars. His funeral, I believe, is May 5th, and there's a visitation on May 4th. And in the obituary, the family said, "May the 4th be with you." The family described him as the kind of person who you knew would take care of you the moment you met him, and he always did. He radiated love and always will. And they put a quote in here: "Beautiful souls like Riley are always with us in the way they made life more beautiful."
Yeah, his high school teachers talked about what a wonderful human being he was.
It seems like the town where he was from, everybody knew him there as well, because as they had that procession from Charlotte, mind you, CMPD escorted him back home yesterday. But it seems like people, lined the streets and people remember him and were saying things to the effect of what his family said in that statement. I know that the North Carolina Senate, there are a lot of honors coming down for him right now, Mike. The North Carolina Senate has memorialized him as well as the other victim who passed away. And apparently the president has said that Riley will get full military honors at his burial.
No one has said that they are surprised that Riley spent his last moment tackling the gunman.
The other death was that of Ellis, and I hope I say his name correct. I know I put a French pronunciation.
I believe it's Parlier.
Parlier?
That's what the family said.
Well, okay, then they've anglicized it. So what do we know about him? He grew up in Midland. He intended to be to major in computer science, I believe, and he wanted to be a video game developer. What else do we know about him?
19-year-old living in Cabarrus County right now. We got a statement from one of his good friends who went to high school with him, just saying that Reed was quiet at first, but once you got to know him, he just became your best friend. He was one of the most smartest, kindest, hilarious people that this friend described to us. He said that Reed was a great person and a great brother.
And the UNC Charlotte faculty has approved degrees in memoriam for Riley Howell and Ellis Parlier. He, in doing so, Chancellor Dubois wrote, "Some of us knew these young men as our students, our classmates, our friends, our family, our sons. For all of us, they were fellow members of Niner Nation, and we will learn and forever remember their names and their legacy." As one of you, or maybe two of you, have mentioned that this has happened so often in this country, and it happens almost every day now, that we're numb to this, and the coverage outside of the local area has become less than it would have been even 4 years ago or 5 years ago. It makes it particularly difficult for everybody involved to cover these things, and the students who knew those people and their families, even more so among young people when this happens, because they had their whole lives ahead of them. All that potential is gone in a nanosecond. Students held a vigil. I think this really hits young people because death is not something young people think about. They held a vigil on campus on Wednesday night in the basketball gym with a small orchestra playing music and a choir singing, and student body president Chandler Crean set a tone of determination.
This does not stop here. We have to stay strong, together, uplift each other, love one another, and unite as one Niner Nation.
And Chancellor Phil Dubois stressed the importance of moving forward.
UNC Charlotte cannot be and will not be defined by this tragedy. We must be defined by how we respond to it.
So, Joe, you were there that night. What can you add about what you saw and what the students, faculty, and staff were talking about?
Walking into the Halton Arena, I just got chills just hearing that orchestra play some faint music, standing next to thousands of students carrying big boxes of tissues. It's impossible not to get emotional. It's impossible not to feel anything when you see the chancellor crying, when you see the student body president crying. 7,500 people turned out for that vigil.
And 11,000 watched it online.
Wow. And after the inside of portions, they all went outside to the quad where there were so many people there that from the end of the vigil you couldn't see to the beginning of it, and they all had candles lit.
I've forgotten the exact number. I think it's around 26,500
Yes.
students go to UNC Charlotte. How many live on campus?
I think it was told a third of them live on campus.
That sounds about right.
Most of them are commuters.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I guess along those same lines, Mike, one of the things that I really thought about a lot is as painful and touching and moving as that ceremony was, I couldn't help but think, how many students have we seen that have had to do that, that have had to make that speech? How many principals? How many chancellors? And as you said to start this show, unfortunately, it's probably not the last time that we're going to see a scene like that. I saw the quote from Pastor Luke Mabry at, I guess, Ellis Parlier's, a gathering of his friends and family. He said, quote, "We can't resign ourselves to it and give in to despair. But boy, it sure is difficult after a week like this."
And Chancellor Dubois was at the university, I've forgotten the state now, where Matthew Shepard.
Wyoming.
He was at the university there when that happened.
Oh, wow.
He was on the show on, I guess it was Wednesday morning, to talk about this whole thing, and he mentioned that. And you talked about, Joe, his emotions as he spoke. And we have just a little piece of what he had to say as he tried to put this event into perspective for those who gathered at the vigil, and was kind of overcome with the reality of the situation.
The loss of Riley and Reed cuts to our core as a university community. We're heartsick as parents ourselves. Lisa and I grieve for the senseless loss of young life and share in the anguish of their parents, their families, and you, their friends.
Campus police have been given high praise for the speed with which they reacted to this. But yesterday, Chancellor Dubois announced plans for an independent external review of the response to the campus shooting. Why?
Well, in fact, I believe I heard the expert on your program on Wednesday say that that would be standard procedure, to just go through everything, have an independent examination of what the reaction was, what went right, what could have been done differently. So I think that is, a pretty logical next step.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of reviews of other shootings, the university clearly had taken some lessons from those. Like, for example, the police ran directly into the building. They weren't outside the building surrounding it behind trees. They ran right in there, which is what law enforcement's learned over time you have to do because, they're armed.
It was just thinking of Joe's from when he was in the helicopter, because they were there right as the officers were, you could tell, trying to figure out what was going on. And it's like you look at it and you're thinking, am I really seeing this happen right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were bringing people out. One person was carried out and thrown into the back of the car and sped off, we assume, to the hospital.
So yesterday morning, CMPD officers, as you mentioned, Jonathan, 4 marked CMPD cars escorted the body of Wiley Howell, to his hometown in Waynesville. His funeral will be Sunday at 5 at the Stewart Auditorium at Lake Junaluska, and funeral arrangements for Ellis Parlier, as of yesterday afternoon, had not been finalized. What do we know about that?
I think they're having a private burial.
Okay. This shooting obviously prompted reaction from city leaders. City Council's Greg Phipps, who represents the university area, called for a community-wide discussion about gun violence. That's something Mayor Vile-Isles has also called for. She said, quote, "I'm just not quite sure how we're going to begin to address what I see almost as a cloud over our city with more violence and shooting. We're going to have to work harder as a community." These mass shootings are occurring with increasing regularity, and nothing is ever done. Is this just all lip service?
Well, I don't think that I want to instantly say it's just lip service. I think that people genuinely care and are upset about this and want to do something about it. I think that it's just such a tangled, complicated issue, and there are such strong feelings when you get into the issue. Look, it's about guns. I mean, let's not pretend that, yes, there's mental health, yes, there are other circumstances, but it really boils down to gun policy for a lot of this, and that becomes a quagmire.
And I do want to be careful about using the term mental health, because not that many of these shooters have a diagnosable mental illness.
That's true.
You know,
That's a
just
good point.
because you're delusional
Right.
or you believe things that are not what we consider normal in our society doesn't make someone mentally ill. And so, you know, I read papers by psychiatrists that just said, let's just be careful using that terminology. And, you know, this guy got a gun legally. As far as we know, he didn't have a diagnosable mental illness, as far as we know. So it's not like it would have showed up in any kind of system.
Well, and not only that, I'm sorry, Mike, just to interrupt very quickly. This week, this is obviously such a huge story, but we had 7 homicides this week.
44. There were 44 homicides on Sunday. The number climbed to 46 on Tuesday, 47 on Wednesday, 48 on Thursday. Is that where we are right now?
Across the street from the university.
Yes, right.
And some of the kids.
And one during the vigil.
Yeah.
Yes, so some of the kids live in that apartment complex.
Right.
We're coming home from the vigil.
So
it's just sickening. I don't get it. I do not get it.
So, we are, like most American cities, we are killing ourselves. That's what we're doing.
This may sound ridiculous. We have a Second Amendment, right to bear arms. It doesn't say anything about bullets. What if you highly control the sale of bullets? Well, you can buy as many guns as you want. You just can't have any bullets.
That would take the will of the lawmakers, and also you can make bullets.
You can?
I mean, I don't know how to do it, but someone probably
Someone
does.
will learn.
Yeah.
And they'll put it on Facebook.
You can 3D print guns.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, there's more to say about the rise in homicides in Charlotte, because it is not only alarming, it is ridiculous. Because last year there were 57 homicides. In 1987 in 2017 there were 87. We're not even halfway through the year, and we're at 48. I think we're at 48.
You're correct.
That's the last number I saw. We'll come back and talk more about that in a moment. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Northeastern University, where the goal is for students and faculty use experience to amplify learning and innovation throughout its global university system. In Charlotte and around the world, northeastern.edu/experience. And the town of Abingdon, Virginia, where visitors can see a play at Barter Theater and why this Depression-era theater once accepted vegetables as payments. More at visitabingtonvirginia.com. Coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock, the Roundup continues on 1A with a look at the news from around the nation. Joshua Johnson and a panel of reporters talk about Attorney General William Barr's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee and his refusal to appear before the House Judiciary Committee. President Trump agrees to a $2 trillion infrastructure spending plan, but where will the money come from? And 2 anti-Semitic incidents within the United States this week. Those topics and more coming up at 10 o'clock in just 20 minutes. And our conversation will continue in just 30 seconds.
Hi, I'm Sean Fox. And I'm Brian Allen. Our podcast, Next Door Docs, is one of the 5 finalists in WFAE's Queen City PodQuest, the search for Charlotte's next great podcast. Learn more about our podcast and find out who will win a podcast development deal with WFAE at the PodQuest Live finale, Saturday, May 4th at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Tickets and information at WFAE.org/Queen City PodQuest.
It's Charlotte Talks and the local news roundup on 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We have a roundtable of reporters assembled, among them Eric Spanberg from the Charlotte Business Journal, where he is the managing editor, Alex Olgan from WFAE News, Joe Bruno, reporter for WSOC-TV, and Jonathan Lowe, reporter anchor for Spectrum News. We were talking just before the break about the rising homicide rate in Charlotte. CMPD Captain Chris Dozier says there is no easy explanation for the tripling of the homicide count.
It's difficult to put your arms around it and really understand what's going on. Compared to having 14 homicides this time last year, now we have 43. There's no excuse other than we see consistently young people. Guns are primarily the way that the violence is carried out.
Again, he said 43, but again, that was earlier this week. The homicide count is now 48, and CMPD Major Mike Campagna says it's going to take a lot of work to tackle this problem. He's talking about work. The mayor's talking about work. What kind of work?
Great question.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that we've seen a lot of is, particularly with the police trying to go into the communities, trying to diffuse tension. You hear not just politicians, but you hear school administrators, you hear people of faith trying to encourage people to resolve their problems in different ways other than gun violence. And
it has become kind of an inside, I don't want to call it an inside joke, but on television, if it bleeds, it leads. So you guys who cover who are in television news tend to go to the sites of these shootings a lot. Maybe you don't, but your colleagues do. What are you hearing in the neighborhoods from people who either witnessed this or knew either the victim or the shooter, or just are afraid for their own safety in their own neighborhood? What are you hearing them talking about?
I know that I hear for some unknown reason still it's that snitch rule of not telling on others.
And that's a major part of this problem, according to Kurt Putney.
It is. And,
But why? I mean, I can understand
not trusting. I guess it goes back to not trusting the police and not feeling like if you have a problem that you call the police or you engage with the police. It's no, I don't trust the police.
What are they saying about why guns are being used to 50 years ago, they would have solved it with a fist fight.
Would they?
Right. Well, police are just as bewildered as you are because they say that's just what's happening. There's no rhyme or reason for these homicides. It's just that people are getting in fights and they're using guns to settle the arguments. Unlike the 90s when we saw a huge rise in homicides, most of those were because of the crack cocaine epidemic. In this case right here, we don't know why. There's just no reason for people killing each other.
Am I correct? And I thought that the police at one point, maybe at multiple points, had said that more and more of these homicides are involving people who know each other. I mean, this is not random.
No, they know each other.
I mean, it's like the one we had earlier this week that involved the fiance and the man and the woman got in the argument earlier this week, and the woman actually was shot and killed by one of the other guys. It's just like, yes, these people know each other, and things are brewing. It's like the shooting, the 48th one over at UNC Charlotte. It was an ongoing, people that had no association with UNC Charlotte, even though it was over there at that an apartment complex where a lot of students live. But this was what police have told us, an ongoing dispute that ended in gunfire.
How much of this might be due just to what I perceive to be an undercurrent, a national undercurrent of anger and frustration?
I don't know if we can attribute to that to the people that know each other, because, I mean, who knows what the individual disagreements are, but I know most of what police respond to are domestic disputes.
And, it all also, to me, it just seems like there's an obsession with guns, because not just in these little disagreements that end in gunfire. I mean, how many times are we hearing on a weekly, daily basis of someone driving down the road, getting into maybe accidentally cut somebody off, and then they get shot at while they're in their car.
That goes back to my question about anger and frustration.
Right.
a lot of these homicides you can't really police your way out of. You can't put a police officer with every single couple who's having an argument. I think economic mobility is an issue. We got to make sure that people have good paying jobs and also places to live, because when you have that purpose, when you have that home that you can go home to, it just gives you more meaning. And I think that that's one way that leaders can address this. Really, it's a health crisis that all these homicides are happening.
That's what the CDC says.
Except we don't know the details because the CDC is not allowed to study gun violence.
One of the big stories would have been, in the absence of what happened at UNC Charlotte this week, one of the big stories would have been what happened on Wednesday as teachers from CMS and around the state marched on the Capitol, Raleigh.
We are here! We are here! We are here! We are here! We are here!
I think we got the point. We are here. That's where they were. They were in Raleigh. How many teachers took part in this march?
Don't know the numbers yet. It was in the thousands, but if you just look at CMS, which is the second largest school district in the state, more than 2,000 teachers, bus drivers, administrators.
Or less than last year.
So I went last year. They moved it to the other side of the Capitol, to the Halifax Mall, and that because it was just too crowded on the other side. I guess that's called the Bicentennial Plaza on the other side of the Capitol building. But they moved it to the other side, and it's appeared more organized and a lot more people this year. I may be wrong, but they certainly moved it to a bigger space.
So you were there both years
Yes.
to cover this march.
Yes.
How would you describe the mood?
Just as excited, engaged. When you ask the teachers the question of, do you feel like you were successful last year in all that you wanted? Last year they were wanting increase in benefits, pay, student
respect.
Correct. They will tell you that they felt like they were able to vote out the supermajority in 2018. So this year they were more specific, and they had these 5 asks that they went to the state capitol with. They organized one thing I did not see last year. So there are several different segments. They have the march, they have the rally where the governor was, and then you have these individual one-on-one meetings with legislators that they set up. And in that big field, Halifax Mall, they broke down into different groups and had one-on-one meetings. Speaker Tim Moore was walking around. I saw some of our local lawmakers in Raleigh having these one-on-one meetings. I did not see that the first year. So it seemed more organized. You could tell that they engaged with the legislators ahead of time, secured meetings. I know that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Association of Educators reached out to 16 of our 17 lawmakers, Mecklenburg County lawmakers, and secured meetings. This was before the rally. The only one that did not respond was, I was told, was Dan Bishop,
who is running for Congress, obviously. I was going to mention, it was also interesting watching this week. You saw leaders in the legislature, including Speaker Tim Moore, putting out press releases and talking points about the 5 years of teacher pay raises, all the milestones that they feel like they have accomplished. So this, as it inevitably would, turn political in many ways. You heard from Republican lawmakers saying that, this was grandstanding, that this was the Democrats, rallying their political base, and that students were paying the price. So obviously, this is not the last time we're going to see teachers marching on Raleigh.
And it will be interesting to see, Mike, if this happens next year. Does it happen on a Wednesday? Because in the House version of the bill, or the budget, they are proposing making it so that school districts could not cancel classes to hold an event such as
But if
a
teachers go to a rally on a school day, despite the law, they're going to cancel classes.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, because there are not enough substitute teachers to go around.
Also, side note, and you may have seen this, Jonathan, Reverend William Barber returning.
Yes.
He was part of that
returned
rally.
to the grounds. He had been banned.
Yes.
In 2017, they lifted the restriction. A judge lifted the restriction.
He almost delivered a sermon.
Yes, he spoke, and he said, they didn't want me to come, but it looks like they've got a bigger problem than me. And he told the teachers it's time to teach them, meaning the legislators, a lesson. Were they listening? Did they learn anything? Were any minds or hearts changed?
No, because the bill, the budget that Republicans are proposing doesn't give them anything that, or not much of what they're requesting. So
because they're asking for not only more pay raises, $15 minimum wage for support personnel.
Yep.
Medicaid expansion.
Yes, 5% cost of living adjustment for retirees, money for more librarians, psychologists, social workers, counselors, nurses, extra pay for teachers with advanced degrees, and a reinstatement of retiree health benefits for teachers hired after 2021.
It does sound like the advanced degrees part will come back, at last I had heard.
It does. And
can we afford all this? I mean, if the
it's
legislature
interesting.
said yes to all of it, could we afford it?
What's interesting, though, is that Mecklenburg County, or CMS, they're proposing pretty much what the teachers are asking from the state. And it looks like in the Mecklenburg County budget, which I know we'll get to
next,
that they're going to maybe give CMS teachers what they're asking. So to your question of can we afford it, I mean, at least in Mecklenburg County, it seems like they can.
Before we get into the county budget, just real quickly, Mike, this boils down to the philosophical debate between Governor Roy Cooper and the Democrats in terms of not cutting taxes further, and the Republican leadership saying you can make more cuts. That's really what we've been talking about the past couple of years.
And the undercurrent of the teachers, just it being a union.
Right.
You know, we know Republicans are not going to really bow down or give in to a union, and the teachers union is a very powerful one, and they were able to vote out or help voting out a super majority last year. So
how much of that was the teachers, and how much of that was the so-called blue-pink wave that came through in the midterms?
Right.
And also, I would mention the Republican legislators say, look, teacher pay in North Carolina has gone from 47th, I think, to 29th in the past 5 years. So the policies that we're embracing are working for educators. That's their argument. Obviously, the educators have a different opinion.
But yes, because we had 3 of them on this week in advance of the march, and they still say that Republicans have it out for public education.
And particularly, you're going to hear all the issues you just outlined, and it's the per-student spending, where North Carolina still badly lags the national average. That's one you're going to hear again and again from the side of public educators.
Okay. Yesterday, the Mecklenburg County Commissioners were presented with the budget for 2020 fiscal year. It includes a proposed tax rate that, if passed, would result in higher property taxes for property owners as a result of the revaluation process. This gets really wiki. This is hard to do on radio. I can't do it
anywhere.
That's right. But the proposed rate of 61.69 cents per $100 value of your house is 1.99 cents higher than a revenue neutral rate, which would keep your tax rate the same, even though the value of your house went up. Do we know what that would mean to the average homeowner, Joe?
Yes. Let's see if I can explain this. So a $250,000 home, which you probably could have in a lot of different areas, townhomes in different parts too. If it went up to $392,000, which is, I think that's a pretty reasonable increase, so that we're seeing a lot. A lot of people are dealing with that, especially in your Wesley Heights area, parts of East Charlotte, Steel Creek. So if your home goes up 56% there, you would see a tax increase of about $361, which is about $30 a month.
Okay. Which is an increase of what? How much? Do we know how much the percentage increase would be? Or does it matter? It's just the money that matters.
I think it's the money that matters.
Yeah. So this is not a revenue neutral rate. Is that what they're likely to pass? A non-revenue rate neutral rate?
Yeah. County Commission Chair George Dunlap said early on that it was going to be hard to get revenue neutral.
This is in the midterms. All of the Republicans on County Commission were voted out, and as they left, they turned over their shoulder and said, "It's all yours, baby." Any tax increases are on the Democrats, the tax and spend Democrats. Is this political suicide for these people?
Well, for some districts, I think so. For people for North Mecklenburg, it may be hard to swallow some of the things that they're asking for in this budget.
I spoke to the vice chair, Elaine Powell. She represents North Mecklenburg. She's been hammered about you need to get revenue neutral. You need to get revenue neutral. She says that she understands those concerns. She doesn't feel easy about not being at revenue neutral, but people have to understand what this budget will fund.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what will it fund? George Dunlap has said previously that we have a large number of county initiatives that need funding, and a revenue-neutral property tax rate won't handle that. So what are the projects? What do we get for our money?
So CMS is getting $50 million additional dollars this year. They had asked for 70. That will fund teacher pay raises. Teachers in CMS will be the highest paid teachers in the state with this budget. It will also fund 27 new social workers, 10 psychologists, 8 coordinators, and 10 counselors.
They'll be able to clear, apparently, the wait list for MEC pre-K, which is going to be, I'm told, about 1,500 families or 1,500 kids that will be able to be pulled off of the wait list.
Because $21 million is going
Correct.
to that.
Right.
Let me interrupt you for just a second, Jonathan, or everybody. Remember that last year the tax rate went up, and it was for expansion of pre-K. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, very quickly. We're running out of time.
So just also public health funding, they are going to add an environmental health specialist. As you know, it's been taking, as we're going into the summer, the county's been challenged with restaurants that maybe are failing grades, but also getting pool inspections done quickly. So that's a big deal for them. A lot in the budget.
Okay.
It was really long.
It's been
$1.9 billion.
It's been a long, difficult, hard week. So the only good news of the week, I guess, for many people is the fact that the Park Terrace Theater opens today after being closed for a lengthy amount of time. It's been remodeled and modernized and computerized, and all kinds of icing going on there.
I'm going to miss somebody giving me my ticket.
Forget that. Buy it at a kiosk. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte